All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending session 1B, Institutional Policies and Resilience at the 2025 RDAP Summit. This is a Zoom webinar. Attendees are muted and cameras are turned off. To ask a question, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. This session will run from 1:15 to 2:15 p.m. Eastern and include 2 live presentations followed by 2 pre-recorded lightning talks. The last 15 minutes will be an open Q&A where you can ask questions of any of the presenters. So we will save all questions until the end of the session, but please feel free to submit your questions throughout the presentations. When asking your question, please indicate the presenter or presenters you would like to direct your question to. After the session, please feel free to drop questions and continue the conversation in the session chat on FeedLoop. For the code of conduct, please remember that the code of conduct is in effect during the duration of the summit. The Research Data Access and Preservation Summit organizers are committed to providing an environment where all attendees can participate fully in the program and activities without fear of harassment or discriminatory behavior of any kind. There is a code of conduct helper available during the session. Emily is identified as the code of conduct helper both in FeedLoop and here in Zoom, and you may direct any messages to Emily if you need assistance. They can provide you with the code of conduct email address or the link to the incident report form if needed. So we're going to go straight into the presentations in the interest of time. They will be introducing themselves. And go ahead, Ibrahim.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen. You can let me know if it's working. Can everyone see my slide, the tenuous juggle navigating research needs policies? Okay, so I see the nod. Okay, wonderful. So thank you all so much for being here. And also thank you to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to present this today. I've been a long-time lurker, first-time poster in RDAP, so I'm really happy to be here. So just jumping right in. Briefly about me, my background is in biomedical research, beginning at my bachelor's at Fresno State, throughout my PhD and postdoc. Like I said, background is in biomedical research. I dabbled in a variety of different fields, including immunology, virology, epigenetics, and transcription. Following that, I became a librarian at UCLA, a biomedical data librarian, where I got a chance to do some research on motivations behind researcher publishing and pre-publishing preferences. Currently, I'm working in a more technical role with UCLA Health IT, supporting the medical school, dental school, and School of Nursing and research informatics and technology. So my title is the title of my talk is The Tenuous Juggle, Navigating Research Needs, Policies, and Institutional Challenges. So what exactly are we juggling? Well, a number of things. First, we're dealing with rapidly evolving research needs as technology develops and as research advances. The needs change, and they change very quickly. And with that comes an increase in the need for data storage. And with more data means more compute required. And with all of that, we need the vendors to provide, we need a variety of vendors to provide the technical resources to support those things. And many of those agreements are changing. They're not holding up with their bargains, like free and unlimited data storage that I think every institution or anyone who's at an academic institution has kind of felt the pain of that. They're also feeling the pain of the rising cost of everything and the instability created in our current climate. And so another thing that we're trying to juggle is our institutional autonomy. How can we support our institutions and make sure that we're not beholden to a handful of companies that provide all of our services? So in our general outline for today, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the efforts that I've done at UCLA Health to better understand our researcher needs. I'm going to talk then about building resilience through centralization of technical services, but also building resilience through decentralization and finding a key balance between those two things in order to best, one, support our research community, and two, make it tenable for us to really manage our data at our institutions. So I hope people can resonate with some of these topics. I know not everyone comes from a biomedical background, but I'm hoping that some of these methodologies and concepts resonate with folks. So For background, for those of you who are not as familiar, biomedical research requires a wide array of resources. We at UCLA Health support basic sciences research, which utilizes model organisms, including yeast, zebrafish, mice, human cell lines, fish, a wide variety of organisms, including flies and more. Many of our research groups extensively utilize the omics methodologies, which some people may have heard about, including transcriptomics, like what genes are expressed in the body, proteomics, what proteins are found in the body, metabolomics, what metabolites are found in the body, and so on. We have also several groups conducting neurology and neurobiology research, which rely heavily on understanding how cells in the brain develop or fail to develop in disease states. So they use cellular and tissue imaging modalities, electrophysiology modalities, and behavioral studies, and all of which we need to find places for that data to go. When I talk about big data, this is the kind of big data that we're talking about. On the other side of the house at UCLA, we also support clinical research, which includes a lot of high security type data. This could include medical record data, surveys and interviews with patients or human research participants. And it also could include pathology and medical imaging and even research directly from the electronic health record. So you can imagine quite a range, even though it's still within the framework of biomedical research. And it's a lot of data. So I'm not going to go into a detail about the table on the right, but it's a summarizing table of where generally UCLA health researchers store their data. Now, I want to say this is not UCLA as a whole, specifically just the health enterprise. So the School of Medicine, School of Nursing, and School of Dentistry. It's about 500 faculty members who we support in my research informatics team. So collectively, that we know of, we have about 15 to 22 petabytes, so that's 1,000,000 gigabytes for those of you who are not familiar, of data that is categorized generally as preclinical or non-clinical data. This is all the basic sciences stuff that I was talking about, and about 8 to 10 petabytes of clinical data. Many of our services are used as mixed use, even though that's not exactly the best way to utilize these services for cost reasons, which I'll talk about in just a second. But just for a little bit of familiarity, we have folks who, data storage is classified in hot storage. This is storage that's actively used, data that needs to be computed on, needs to be consistently worked with, and cold storage, which is more archival. A lot of the folks who are deeply into preservation understand this cold storage modality. It may take time to retrieve that data, but since you don't need it super immediately or use it very frequently, that's okay, and it's generally much cheaper. But what I want to draw everyone's attention to is the approximate growth cost. Since I started collecting data on our organization, just on the known platforms, we have grown approximately 5 petabytes in the last year and change, which takes me to, this is back of the napkin type calculations, an approximate increase in bill of $600,000 a year. So it's an extremely expensive growth profile, and a lot of that is absorbed through certain contracts with companies, but ultimately it's not sustainable. And a lot of companies are removing that free and unlimited or that unlimited aspect of this. And so a lot of the costs of this need to get pushed back to our researchers. And ultimately, when we think about resilience, we see that when the cost goes up and up and up and up and up, it makes us more vulnerable. Very quickly, research also requires diverse compute requirements. We have people who are computing on their local machines, be it their personal computers that they bring or machines that are issued by our IT division. We have virtual machines that we have based in our servers that we are able to provision to users. Our users also leverage high-performance computing resources on campus. We also have research enclaves, secure data area or data analysis zones where people can do their medical research. And a number of our investigators have cloud-based workflows, be they CPU-based workflows, RAM-based workflows, or GPU-based workloads. All of this costs money. And just to give everyone a slice of some of the scope of the compute resources, I'm showing you a plot here of the 234 a sample of 234 virtual machines that we have issued at UCLA. And we can see that there is a zone on the x-axis. We have number of CPUs for the virtual machines, and on the y-axis, the available RAM. For the virtual machines, we see a cluster down at the bottom, which is very similar to like a little bit stronger than your typical computer specs, but we also have virtual machines for specialized use cases that have up to 128 gigabytes of RAM or 32 CPUs for the kind of high performance computing workflows that are required. Adding to the complexity, basically every medical or biomedical research instrument comes with its own independent software. And for labs that focus on one technique, that makes it relatively simple. They work with one software a lot. But for labs that don't know which direction they're going, it may require a lot of different software. And making sure there's processes to make that efficient is something that that can definitely help with resilience, and I'll talk about that shortly. So even though research software can be very diverse and can be very instrument focused, there are certain collaboration tools that many of us are familiar with, like document preparers, spreadsheet preparers, presentation, statistics software, and hardware infrastructure that are ubiquitous across organizations. So I give you all of that background as kind of the high level things that we think about on the technical side of the house here at UCLA Health. So now let's talk a little bit about how to build resilience through centralization and decentralization. And I want to tell you that this is not something that we figured out at UCLA. We have a lot of problems, which I'm hoping to at least somewhat address through this section. But my main point here is that both centralizing things and decentralizing things can enable resilience, and being mindful of where our institutions could benefit is something that I think everyone could take pause and think about for themselves. So how do we build resilience through centralization? First, economies of scale. Currently, the cost of storing and managing and analyzing data is consistently increasing. As I pointed out, companies that provide these services have consistently demonstrated that they are totally willing to just jack up the prices and extract as much money out of our institutions as possible. Yet we remain dependent on these companies to provide the technologies that is essential to our work. We have to work together across our institutions and within our institutions to negotiate contracts with companies. So if we're dealing with groups like UCLA or even other like consortium-wide considerations, that collective bargaining will ultimately help us be resilient. So my point here is really a call to let's work together as much as we possibly can to do our best to lower our bills. From an internal perspective, standardizing policies can help with users. It could be making risk assessment a smoother process for research, but it could also mean standardizing data management policies, including data retention policies. So researchers aren't storing useless data ad infinitum. They can actually delete data that has bad controls or is not no longer useful to them. They just don't need to hold on to everything forever because we just can't sustain it. Centralization also enables security controls. It allows for economies of scale when purchasing security software. This is something that many of our institutions value a lot, making sure that our data is secure from either bad actors or nefarious government or entities, foreign or our own. Also centralization can help reduce redundancy. When you have fragmented organizations, there can be a lot of redundancy. And that can actually make us vulnerable. However, there are drawbacks to centralization. We at UCLA deal a lot with, we have some aspects of centralized policies, but we deal with very inflexible situations where we deal with sometimes worm data with the same scrutiny as human subjects research data. And it actually builds a lot of resentment between researchers because we have people asking our yeast researchers, how many clinical patients do you have in your database? And they're like, what on earth are you talking to me about? I don't work with patients. It can make too much centralization can make things inflexible, and it can create resentment within the organization. Again, too much centralization can also lead to a single point of failure. A lot of IT groups are worried, oh, I can't take a day of vacation because if my system goes down, I need to be available. If we have too many single points of failure, it can create vulnerabilities in our organization. It can also create slow response times. We also deal with situations where an investigator has something that they need, but because the processes aren't clear to everyone across the centralized organization, it makes it very complicated to address the issues because the implementation of a highly centralized group can be very complex and slow. How do we build resilience through decentralization? Different disciplinary areas. So I highlighted that we have a scope of disciplinary areas that we deal with at UCLA. Um, um, some have very different needs than others. And this flexibility can be essential in an organization and can be difficult to achieve in a fully centralized infrastructure. With smaller decentralized users, decentralized groups, it can be easier to be responsive to help users. It can grant autonomy for groups that need more independence or who are more able to address the needs that they have without dealing with the larger organization. And then finally, it allows specialized groups, especially disciplinary areas, to get specialized support relevant to the issues most pertinent to that group. You don't want to have someone who's just generally an expert in purely research compute, addressing necessarily the storage needs of the neurology department, for example. That can create tension because they don't know the full scope of services that are available. However, decentralization can also make organizations vulnerable. It can result in increased cost due to some redundancy in services and tasks. It can result in inequitable resource distribution, meaning groups that have a lot of money, like the health sciences, for example, or certain physical sciences, can upgrade their technology more quickly than other groups and leave them behind. It can also result in security vulnerabilities if we have many different technology supporting groups and a lot of collaborations, as we do at many institutions. It can be very complicated to make all of that data transfer happen in a secure manner. And finally, to the point of increased costs, it can create redundancy and waste. If we teach the same intro to our workshop from 9 different groups across campus, it actually may be a bit inefficient, and there could be some synergy there that and scaling that our groups could benefit from. So my last little bit,
I'm
yes.
sorry, I'm gonna have to cut you off. It's a bit over 15 minutes.
Okay,
Can you wrap
I
up in like 10 seconds
I
maybe?
can wrap up in 10
I'm so
seconds.
sorry.
No problem. So there are a bunch of different models that people can use to build and balance the centralization to decentralization. I highly recommend everyone think about their institutions and how to implement things because it's going to be unique for everyone. Resilience often means pushing up against systems that we benefit from. So identify where your organization can do it. And I want to take 2 seconds to acknowledge a lot of people who supported this effort. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak, and that's my time.
Thank you. Thanks for going through the last part quickly. We can circle back if anyone has questions about that last part. And we'll go straight into our next presentation. If our next presenters want to queue up their slides and just go ahead and start, that would be great. Awesome. I'm going to start the timer. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the Repository of Last Resort, exploring the relevance of institutional data repositories. I'm Diana Park from Oregon State University. I'm joined today by my colleagues Clara Labat and Kara Key. And we also don't want to forget our colleagues LK Borland and Jane Nichols, who contributed to this study. So before we delve into our actual study and findings, I wanted to go over our background and context a little bit. So Scholars Archive at OSU is Oregon State University's institutional repository. Datasets have been accepted to our IR since 2015. We don't have a separate data repository, although we will make referrals if, as needed. And currently our IR holds over 200 datasets, and every single dataset has been reviewed prior to being published. And of course, there's no cost to the researcher. With that in mind, we want to make sure that our services were meeting researcher needs. we realized that researchers have many options when selecting and depositing their data, and we're willing to consider other service models if this is something that researchers wanted or needed. So this study was designed to investigate how researchers choose a data repository and to see if our IR was still meeting their needs. So with that, we designed our study around these three hypotheses. So hypothesis 1 is researchers are making informed, deliberate decisions about where to deposit their data. Hypothesis 2, scholars archive at OSU as an institutional repository is filling a need different from other existing discipline-agnostic repositories. And hypothesis 3, the strength of the OSU institutional repository is in the services offered rather than the actual software. So we identified study participants who had deposited data either to the IR or 5 selected discipline-agnostic repositories over a 4-year period. We first sent out a survey with questions informed by the NSTC's desirable characteristics of data repository for federally funded research guidelines and work done by Donaldson and Kopke. The survey and interviews explored basically the same topics, but the interviews went more in depth into the motivations and circumstances that made an individual researcher choose one repository over another. And you can find a little bit more about our methodology in the linked QR code. Now, before we delve into our findings, we wanted to touch on some limitations. First, small sample size. We had a large group of potential participants, but very small survey response rate. And due to that, not all demographics are represented. We realized fairly quickly that we are missing responses from grad students and early career researchers. And finally, this is not a limitation per se, but all data was collected before February 2025. And so prior to federal data deletion, I think we had one interview collected the first week of February, and the responses from that was a lot different and interesting than some of the other interviews that we had done. So it could have been a lot different if we had done the interviews afterwards.
All right, so let's take a look next at some findings for our first hypothesis, that researchers are making informed and deliberate decisions. So in our questionnaire, we asked what strategies were used to make the decision about where data had been deposited. The height of the bars in the graph here show the total responses for each option, and the colors signify IR users in red and external repository users in blue. We had a total of 10 responses from researchers who had deposited to the IR, 30 responses from those who had used an external repository. So the visualization doesn't represent the relative percentages, just the overall total. Okay, so with that in mind, some takeaways were that across all our responses, convenience is the highest ranking factor in the decision. The next 3 highest ranking factors were previous deposits with a repository, institutional trust, which did have a higher percentage showing among IR users, and recommendations from others, which had a lower percentage showing for IR users. The option that's most strongly associated with our H1 hypothesis, that they had made the choice by evaluating the characteristics of the repository and its appropriateness for their data, was selected by less than half of our respondents. Next slide. The questionnaire went on to ask how much researchers valued different features provided by data repositories. Overall, our respondents valued the basics. The highest ranking features were affordability, discoverability, being able to get a DOI, safety or reliability of data, and ease of use. They were much less interested in having peer review workflows for their data, embargoes, being able to see usage metrics, integrating with other data management tools, and versioning support. Our interview data backed this up as well. The lower ranking features were discussed as nice to have, but not particularly important for most researchers. Now next. So next we will look at our second hypothesis, that our institutional repository is filling a need that is different from other existing discipline-agnostic data repositories. And these are some of the areas of the questionnaire where the responses showed the most significant differences between IR depositors and external repository depositors. IR users were more interested in having staff available for help with deposits, and they were more likely to cite trust or institutional affinity as a factor in their decision. We did have 100% of IR user respondents say that they would definitely recommend the repository to others or use it again, versus 66% for external depositors. Looking at the number of respondents who were not at all interested in repository features that we asked about, so they were less likely to choose 0 on our 0 to 3 scale. IR users are interested in having staff available for questions and in having curation services, while external depositors are much less interested. So continuing to look at who ranked features as being of least interest, IR users were not interested in integrating with tools such as GitHub, in supporting peer review workflows, or in versioning for data sets. And we saw fewer 0 rankings for those features for our external depositors. And since these are features that our IR does not strongly support at this time, we're a little bit happy to see that our current depositors were not missing those features. All right, and finally, we will look at results for our third hypothesis, that the strength of OSU's institutional repository as a data repository lies in the services offered rather than the software. When we talk about services in this context, we're thinking of the support that's offered by our staff as opposed to built into the repository platform itself. So this includes curation, consultations, and support that we provide one-on-one to researchers, as well as written policies and guidelines that we've made available. As we've already seen, survey respondents who had deposited to the IR ranked interactions with repository staff as more valuable, particularly the curation services. And this was strongly backed up by our interview participants as well. In addition, we see that cost is a very important factor for researchers, and the OSU IR is free for depositors. In the interviews in particular, we heard that IR depositors appreciate efforts that library staff have made to accommodate larger data sets, although large is definitely relative in this landscape. The data that we're handling is nowhere near what Ibrahim was describing in the previous talk. But unsurprisingly, we do see evidence that researchers in the study who have higher levels of data sharing experience are less interested in these kinds of support services. All right, next.
Okay, so after looking at the results that Kira just talked about that addressed our 3 hypotheses, we went back to our main research question. Is our institutional repository providing a service different than other domain-agnostic repositories? And if so, who is our institutional repository best? And even though the repository users are diverse, we found that we could structure IR users using personas. Personas are imaginary archetypical people who have precise characteristics, precise goals, and very specific needs. And these personas are commonly used as a design tool during the phase of designing a tool, the investigative phase of designing a tool. In this case, we came up with 3 personas who represent users whose needs fit well with the services offered by our repository. Our first persona is the open data champion. This is a persona who's knowledgeable about data sharing, practices it, even advocates for it, and believes strongly in institutional branding. So will go out of her way to deposit data in the institutional repository. It may be kind of an unicorn persona, but we found several during our study. Our second persona is what we called the overwhelmed early career researcher. That could be a person who's kind of inexperienced, needs support, needs low cost, really values convenience. They could be, for example, a student depositing data for her dissertation, or they could also doing time-consuming work for senior researchers. At this point, this is kind of a hypothetical persona in this study, but we've encountered them in practice and we've heard about them from participants in our study. And finally, the last persona is what we call the repository of last resort. This persona has some experience, established workflows. They usually send their data to the same repositories, but occasionally they will need something different that is not covered by these usual repositories. Maybe they have a data set that is of a slightly different discipline or a different size, and they will use the IR if it's convenient because it offers flexibility. So this flexibility part is important for them. And this persona was well represented in our study. None of these three personas care much about specific repository features like review workflows or data usage metrics. The basics will work well for all of them. Okay, so our conclusions. The first conclusion, which maybe we should have guessed, but actually surprised us, is that researchers are not considering which repository to use very carefully. The main considerations are convenience, cost, recommendations from colleagues, and their own previous experiences. We also found that there isn't a strong proposal from users about things that we should change or features that we should add to our repository. And even though we may have some self-selected group of IR users, we heard these not only from IR users, but also from users from other repositories when we inquired about what they need or want from a repository. Third, institutional trust is one of the most important outcomes of this study. Many researchers really like the idea of an OSU repository, and these may become more important given the current climate of uncertainty at the federal level. At this point, the clearest answer that we got out of this study for improving the IR is outreach, because the awareness of data repository services is low. We had several people that mentioned, both in the survey and the interviews, that they would have used the IR if they had known it existed. And finally, we're generally missing data from early career researchers, as Diana pointed out earlier. It's not clear if grad students and early career, our second persona, should be a target audience. So we plan on working on this topic in the following months. And this is our final slide with our emails and a few references. So thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. If you could stop your screen share, great, thank you. So we are gonna go straight into the pre-recorded lightning talks, and then after the recording, we'll go through the Q&A. So our presenters, if you see questions for yourselves in the Q&A, you can choose to wait and answer them live, and that's fine. Or you can type an answer if you feel like that's the better way to respond. So you all can decide. Ashley, do you want to start the recording? I know she's doing it. All right. Thank you.
Please yell if it does not work. I'm hoping that it will.
Today, we are going to talk to you about our project to identify repository options for sharing sensitive data. I'm Megan Potterbush, and with me is
Mary Oberle.
I'm the Research Data Steward at Harvard Kennedy School.
And I'm the Instruction and Data Services Librarian at William & Mary.
Here is the roadmap of where we're going on our presentation today. And we're just going to jump right into user needs. Data management efforts at HKS, so Harvard Kennedy School, are heavily focused on data privacy and security topics that arise during acquisition and analysis phases of the research lifecycle. And we wanted to know how to comply with we cover how to comply with requirements, what tools you can use, required administrative documentation, etc. However, we also really value open science and the generation of fair data. To bridge the gap between securing sensitive data and public data publication for research use, we needed a way to plan ahead to support any researcher who needs or wants to publish sensitive data. How can we help them make their data as open as necessary? So we had an opportunity to work with the Data Services Continuing Professional Education Group when they reached out for potential capstone projects in fall of 2024. And so we got to get some help. So with Mary, we determined that we needed a list of data repositories to recommend that would provide secure storage as well as mediated access to restricted data beyond options like Dataverse or Zenodo, which allow researchers to mediate requests themselves. We also needed to know what requirements Harvard might have for said repositories. So we wanted to ensure that researchers and others who could access data deposited by our researchers independently while still protecting the data at an appropriate level based on sensitivity and potential for misuse. Sustainability and best practices dictated that the repository should take on the vetting responsibility when they take on storage and access. So data repositories can use data use agreements to do this, to verify the researcher who wants to use the data has a true research need, and that they will ensure that security and privacy standards will be met.
So, how we went ahead and started doing this project. I'll talk a little bit about how we identified our repositories. I first started with actually looking at those very lengthy repository lists that exist. And these are the 6 that I focused on. And they were short in some cases and longer in other cases, but they were easier to navigate through in the time we had on the project. To determine whether or not a repository from one of those lists was part of consideration, I wanted to focus on that it had social sciences, that it was located in the United States, that it actually implemented that data usage agreement, and that it actually accepted restricted data. In total, 93 repositories from those lists were within that kind of area that we looked at, and 16 of those met all those criteria that I just mentioned. So of those 16, I also took into consideration other things when creating our spreadsheet of repositories. So they mentioned like the different focuses and so forth, but they also talk about what kind of costs were associated with depositing and accessing, what the process was for researchers to deposit their data, if they had curation requirements, and anything else that was really important for somebody to know if they wanted to deposit it within that repository. So the documentation is important to us as librarians, and what I did is documented the entire process that I went through. So what the lists were, how we organized the spreadsheet, how we determined if something was in scope or out of scope, and also created a glossary of terms so there was shared vocabulary so that anybody who accessed this spreadsheet knows what they're looking at. What we want to talk about today is future work. We'd love to see this spreadsheet actually grow. We couldn't cover everything. As we know, there's a ton of other repository lists that exist out there. We'd love to include some non-US focused repositories, look at other disciplines, and dig into those bigger repositories. And so we have uploaded our spreadsheet on OSF, and we hope others will join us in growing it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, RDAP 2025. This is Abigail Gobin speaking, and this is Unwilling, Unable, Unsafe, a policy to meet unusual sharing requests. If you're in the United States, these are pretty familiar examples of required sharing surrounding research data. The NIH policy is already in effect, requiring data shared by the end of an associated publication or the end of a performance period. And going into effect in various parts of Q4 2025 are the outputs from the OSTP 2022 memo, the Nelson memo, saying that all federal agencies needed to make publications and supporting data available on publication without an embargo. And this can lead to a couple of potentially difficult sharing scenarios for researchers and their data. The researcher may be unwilling, unable, or feel unsafe. Now, we all can think of a researcher who refuses to share data no matter what. They are unwilling to share that data that could be internally with peers or externally from a data request. You can also likely think of some researchers who may be unable to share the data. Perhaps they're no longer with the institution, or they're on sabbatical and they're out of the country. There are many reasons why a researcher may be unable to facilitate a data sharing request. Increasingly, however, we also recognize that there may be instances where a researcher feels unsafe, where they feel threatened by the requester. This could be due to the subject of their research, if it's human subjects working on a sensitive topic, or a specific location that they feel might be threatened, or it might also have something to do with intellectual property. Whatever the reason, the researcher wants someone else to make that decision. The way that the University of Illinois Chicago has approached this is to develop the Access to Sensitive UIC Sponsored Research Data Policy. This went into effect last October. It has two main parts to it. One is the responsibility of the university. The university, as the data owner, has to provide a process for external researchers to gain access to controlled or sensitive research datasets in concordance with the terms and conditions of data use in many sponsored program agreements. Our Vice Chancellor of Research Office will oversee this. The other set of responsibilities is that of the data steward. This is usually going to be the primary investigator, but in a situation where the researcher is unable to facilitate, the data steward could be a department head or someone else. At the conclusion of the project, if a data steward is unable or unwilling to continue to serve as the primary contact, they shall defer to the committee overseen by the VCR. So what does this look like in implementation? And please keep in mind, we're still underway on this. We're putting together a committee with representation from across the campus, the Vice Chancellor of Research Office, Sponsored Programs IRB, Global Engagement, our Technology Transfer Tech Management Office, and also faculty representation from the Faculty Senate Research Committee and representatives from across the different areas in the university. Where appropriate, we would also want community representatives or other representatives that can advocate on behalf of the subjects of the data. The process for this would include that the external requester would complete a data request form. The VCR would refer that to the committee, who would assess the request, looking at funder obligations, data sensitivity, what the project status is, and where the data currently is residing. They would return a finding. If the request is approved, we would refer it to IT to get the data from a server, to IRB if we need human subject protection, probably a data use agreement. We expect that this may also cause instances where the requester needs to come on site or use UIC equipment to access the data, where we cannot transfer it securely to another server. In the instance where they've returned a finding of disapproval, we'd need to provide a reason why, and also alert as to whether or not we would welcome a resubmit of the request. Our goal with this policy and the procedure underneath it is to provide support for researchers who are navigating new and changing sharing requests. We want to have procedures in place in advance of external demands and facilitate data sharing as openly as possible while protecting our sensitive subjects. This is our bibliography, and we would welcome any questions. Thank you.
Great. So we have a solid 15 to 17 minutes for questions. I see that there were some that were put into the Q&A, so I'm going to go ahead and read the ones that haven't been answered by our presenters. So there were a few that have already been answered. So if you're interested, you can find them in the Q&A, and you can find the answered ones under like the answered tab. So thank you very much to all our speakers. These were really, really fascinating, thought-provoking presentations. I know I was like very, 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 yeah, I was very into them. Sorry, I'm jet lagged. Okay. So thank you to our presenters and audience for participating in this session. We will see you at our next session. We are moving into a 30-minute break right now. If you are staying in the same Zoom webinar for the next session, which is 2B, you're welcome to stay connected here during the break. If you would like to attend session 2A, there is a different Zoom link, which you can find in the Feed Loop Sessions tab. Thank you again to our presenters and our attendees, and enjoy the rest of your conference.